I found my client standing alone on the terrace at nearly midnight, staring into the darkness as if the city lights below had stolen every reason she had left to smile. The wind tugged at her hair, and for one terrifying second, my heart stopped. Not because I thought she would jump, but because I recognized that look, the look of someone whose heart had just been shattered into pieces too small to put back together. The charity gala inside the hotel ballroom was still alive with music, laughter, and clinking glasses. Wealthy donors celebrated another successful fundraising event while waiters moved elegantly through the crowd. Yet out there, under the cold night sky, stood a woman who looked completely alone. Her name was Claire Monroe, and she was my client. I worked as an event consultant in Chicago, helping organizations plan large fundraising events. Claire had hired me 6 months earlier to organize one of the biggest charity galas her foundation had ever hosted. Over those months, I had come to know her as intelligent, generous, and remarkably kind. She was also the type of person who always took care of everyone else. Tonight was supposed to be her triumph. Instead, it had become her worst nightmare. I slowly stepped onto the terrace. Claire. She didn't turn around immediately. When she finally did, I saw tears shining in her eyes. "Everyone's looking for you," I said softly. She laughed bitterly. "Then they're looking in the wrong place." I leaned against the railing beside her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The city stretched endlessly before us. Finally, she whispered, "Have you ever loved someone who convinced you that you weren't enough?" The question hit harder than I expected. I knew exactly who she meant. Daniel, her ex-boyfriend, the man who had appeared unexpectedly at the gala less than an hour earlier, the man who had publicly humiliated her. Earlier that evening, Claire had been delivering a speech about the foundation's mission when Daniel walked into the ballroom holding the hand of a younger woman. The room had gone silent. Many guests knew their history. Daniel hadn't simply broken up with Claire. He had left her after 7 years together. 7 years. Then he had spent months telling mutual friends that she was too focused on work, too emotional, too difficult to love. As if abandoning someone was easier than taking responsibility for your own choices. Tonight, he took things even further. During a conversation near the stage, he loudly joked that Claire's charity work was probably compensation for failing at relationships. The comment drew uncomfortable laughter. And although Claire maintained her composure, I saw the pain in her eyes. Now she stood beside me on the terrace, trying not to fall apart. "I spent years supporting him," she said quietly. "I believed in his dreams. I helped him build his business. I celebrated every success." Her voice cracked. "And somehow I'm still the one who wasn't enough." I looked at her. "Number." She frowned. "No, no," I repeated firmly. "Someone else's inability to appreciate your value doesn't reduce your value." For a moment, she simply stared at me. Then fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "Why does it still hurt so much?" "Because heartbreak doesn't follow logic. It doesn't care how successful you are. It doesn't care how many people admire you. Pain has a way of finding the places where we feel most vulnerable." I wanted to say all that. Instead, I handed her my jacket because the night had grown cold. "Because you loved him," I said. "That's never something to be ashamed of." For the first time all evening, her expression softened. We stayed on the terrace for nearly an hour, talking, laughing occasionally, remembering funny disasters from months of event planning. Slowly, the sadness in her eyes began to loosen its grip. Before we returned inside, she asked something unexpected. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." She took a deep breath. 3 years ago, my foundation almost closed. That surprised me. Her organization was now one of the most respected charities in the city. I never knew. Almost nobody does. She smiled faintly. "We were broke. Donations disappeared. Staff left." "What happened?" She looked down at the streets below. "A stranger saved us." "A stranger?" Claire nodded. "One winter, I was sitting alone in a coffee shop trying to figure out how to tell my employees they would lose their jobs." She paused. "An older man noticed I was crying. I listened carefully. He didn't know me. He didn't know anything about my my foundation. What did he do? He bought me coffee. I blinked. That's it? She laughed softly. That's what I thought. The smile disappeared from her face. Then he sat down and listened for 2 hours. I said nothing. He told me something I'll never forget. She looked directly at me. He said, when life breaks your heart, don't let it convince you to stop opening it. The words hung in the air, powerful, simple, true. What happened to him? I asked. Her eyes grew sad. I never saw him again. The next morning, she discovered that same stranger had anonymously donated $50,000 to her struggling foundation. The donation kept the organization alive. Years later, it had helped thousands of families. One act of kindness. One stranger. Thousands of lives changed. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Claire smiled through tears. Because tonight you reminded me of him. I didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever given me a compliment that meaningful. The following week, I thought our conversation would simply become a memory. I was wrong. 3 days later, Claire called me. Would you help me with something? Sure. I want to find him. The stranger? Yes. I laughed. You realize that's like finding a needle in a haystack. I know. But I have to try. And so began one of the most unexpected journeys of my life. For months, we searched. We visited old coffee shops, tracked down former employees, contacted local charities, followed dozens of dead ends. Most people would have given up. Claire never did. Because gratitude can be incredibly stubborn. Then one rainy afternoon, everything changed. An elderly barrister recognized the description. Tall gentleman? She asked. Greatcoat. Claire's eyes widened. Yes. The woman nodded. I remember him. My heart raced. Do you know his name? She smiled. Walter Hayes. Finally, a real lead. But when we found Walter's address, we discovered something heartbreaking. He no longer lived there. A neighbor explained that Walter had moved into assisted living after developing serious health problems. Claire immediately asked for directions. The facility sat on the outskirts of the city. Nothing fancy. Just a modest building surrounded by gardens. When we arrived, a nurse led us inside. Walter sat alone near a window reading a worn paperback novel. He looked older than we expected. Fragile. Yet his eyes remained warm. Claire approached slowly. Mr. Hayes? He looked up. Yes? You probably don't remember me. He studied her face, then smiled. The crying girl from the coffee shop. Claire froze. So you do remember? Of course I do. Tears instantly filled her eyes. For nearly 2 hours they talked. Walter remembered everything. The coffee, the conversation, the donation, everything. Eventually Claire asked the question she had carried for years. Why did you help me? Walter smiled. Because someone helped me first. He explained that decades earlier, after losing his wife, he had fallen into depression. A stranger had shown him unexpected kindness during his darkest moment. That kindness saved his life. From that day forward, Walter promised himself he would pass that gift to someone else whenever possible. One act becoming another, then another, then another. Like ripples spreading across water. When it was time to leave, Claire reached into her purse. She handed Walter a folder. What is this? He asked. Open it. His hands trembled slightly as he looked inside. Then he stared at her in disbelief. The foundation had established a permanent community program in his late wife's name, a program that would provide scholarships for struggling families every year. Walter began crying. Claire cried too. The nurse cried. Honestly, I nearly cried myself. The room felt overwhelmed by something beautiful. Not wealth, not success, not achievement. Gratitude, pure gratitude. As we walked towards the exit, Walter called out, Claire. She turned. You know why your ex doesn't define you? She smiled sadly. Why? Because broken hearts create some of the strongest people I've ever met. The room fell silent. Then he added one final sentence. The people who survive pain often become experts at healing others. Neither of us spoke during the drive home. We didn't need to. Some moments are too meaningful for conversation. A year later, I attended another charity gala organized by Claire's foundation. This time, The atmosphere felt different. Lighter, happier, stronger. Claire stood confidently on stage, not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because she had discovered something more valuable than the relationship she lost: purpose. Near the end of her speech, she shared Walter's story with the audience. Then she announced that the scholarship program had already helped hundreds of families. The ballroom erupted in applause. As everyone celebrated, I noticed something remarkable. Claire wasn't looking at the crowd. She wasn't thinking about Daniel. She wasn't wondering whether her ex regretted leaving. She wasn't seeking validation from anyone. Instead, she smiled toward a photograph displayed beside the stage. A photograph of Walter Hayes, the stranger whose kindness had changed her life, and whose kindness had now changed countless others. That night, as guests began leaving, Claire found me near the entrance. "Do you remember what I asked you on the terrace?" I nodded. She smiled. "I finally know the answer." "What answer?" She looked around the room filled with volunteers, donors, and families whose lives had been touched by the foundation. Then she said quietly, "Being enough was never the problem." And she was right. Sometimes the people who break our hearts make us question our worth. They make us wonder whether we should have been smarter, prettier, richer, stronger, or somehow different. But worth isn't determined by who leaves. It's revealed by how we continue loving, helping, and showing kindness after we've been hurt. Because the most extraordinary people aren't the ones who never experience heartbreak. They're the ones who refuse to let heartbreak harden them. And in a world that often feels divided, cold, and self-centered, a single act of kindness can still travel farther than anyone imagines. Just ask a woman standing alone on a terrace, or the stranger who bought her coffee, or the thousands of lives changed because one person chose compassion over indifference. Sometimes that's all it takes to transform a broken heart into a force powerful enough to heal the world around it.